So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this is the second time that I got to be here, and I really loved, especially the participation. Being able to do questions and answers at the end was really helpful. Last time I did a presentation on anxiety, and you'd be a little surprised that there's quite an overlap in what we're going to talk about today. It does affect executive functioning quite a bit, so that'll also come up. And I want to thank the Darien SEPAC. I have this extra special sense of appreciation for them now because in my town, in Newtown, we just opened, I helped found a special needs PTA for the first time. And so, a parent group focused on special needs, getting that started and having that be maintained by the momentum of parents is really just an amazing thing to see. And I see how much hard work goes into that now. So I appreciate everything that they do. So today, what we're going to talk about is a very overlapping two conditions of ADHD and executive functioning. So we're going to talk about, this is our agenda for today. Globally, we're going to just describe, what is this very broad term that we all hear about. It's like, if we were on the internet, it would be trending, right? Executive functioning. It's like everybody talks about it, but it's hard to really pin down what it means. So we're going to talk about, what's a good definition to understand what that is. And then we're going to talk about what's the association between ADHD and executive functioning. And then how do we go about identifying, because that's probably everybody's main question as parents. Does my child have trouble with executive functioning? Is this everyday childhood that I'm seeing? Is it more? And so we're going to talk about how there are actual ways to measure executive functioning. And then we're going to talk about strategies to improve it. And they're focused very much on what parents can encourage and actually help implement. So it's very parent focused. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, what's a more kind of academic definition of it. So executive function skills are, globally, it just means it's the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, and how we have to juggle multiple tasks successfully. That is a broad term, but I'm going to describe to you in like maybe a more visual way. Like if you picture an air traffic controller, that is like somebody, standing there with their colored lights, right? And they're on the runway and they're trying to manage the safe arrival and departures of all these different airplanes at the same time. The air traffic controller would be the executive functioning system in your brain. So that controller, that air traffic controller, is that executive functioning man in our heads, for lack of better terms. And so them having to manage, like there's multiple runways, there's, you have to filter out all the distractions, all the things that might go wrong, and you have to stop and problem solve, or people get hurt, right? So you have to be able to prioritize what's in front of you and control your impulses. You have to be able to rein everything in. And so if we think about executive functioning, I think it's helpful to think of a couple of different kind of visual pictures that'll help us remember what it really is in the brain. Because memorizing brain structures is really not all that helpful. But if we were, we would say that the seat of executive functioning is the prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain, the frontal lobes. It's the part of the brain that develops last. So we jokingly say, but it's quite true, that executive functioning deficits is, if there was a disorder of childhood, it would be executive functioning disorder, right? Because this is what they all struggle with. Try to organize themselves, plan, time manage, everything that they are learning and coming to terms with how to do as they mature. So if we picture an air traffic controller, that's one of the central pictures that people use. And they also consider using the analogy of a symphony. So you know how there's a symphony and there's like a bunch of different instruments and band members all in this huge group in front. And so say, you're all the members of the orchestra right there, and the conductor is the executive functioning, the person that tells them, okay, you start now, and then you're going to come in, and then your timing is here, and then you go there. It's the person who is controlling what goes next and that's how you carry out tasks in your life. Everything, literally from school to home to relationships, you're always managing all these different simultaneous processes. And so executive functioning is your emerging skills in being able to manage all of that. So that is one thing that's more casual definition of executive functioning. And it's a long term, so I just will skip to saying EF a lot. So the other thing that you can visually picture is, did everybody see that movie Inside Out? The Disney movie, when they had all the characters, all the different emotions, and they're kind of like all vying for the controller. They're at the helm, and they're like, no, anger's going to take over now, and no, fear is taking over. That is it's a great depiction of what happens emotionally in executive functioning. So there's different aspects of executive functioning, and emotional control is a big part of it. And so keep that picture in your mind of what is a good, decent portion of EF is being able to manage your emotions like that. So that's another visual to keep in mind. Does that part make sense so far? Okay. All right, and now the thing that should make us feel a little bit better is that EF improves as the brain is coming online. Basically, the brain is still developing, now we know, up until around age 25. So that's like amazing to me, right? It's like you're done with college already. You're starting your life, maybe building your family, and you still don't have all of the brain structures in place that are working at full tilt that we would need it to. That's amazing. It's amazing that we don't make more mistakes and judgment errors, and that we survive, that we don't make these catastrophic errors in judgment and picking our careers and everything, because that's during those ages that we're doing all of that. So we do know that those structures are in place, but we need to help kids get there. So you might have ever heard of this theory that this is what we apply to EF a lot, is that parents and teachers are the scaffolding. We are the ones that are like the support structure. So you see, like on the side of the brain, there's like, as if when you're building a building and you have scaffolds there until it's fully built and it could stand on its own. That's the exact analogy that we use, that we are almost their external executive functioning for them. And it's clearly what is success is if we can do our job well enough that the knowledge transfers. And that is really nuanced, right? Because that means we have to be careful about not doing for them, but actually helping them learn the skills. And so that's a key feature of trying to kind of improve or impart skills that are, EF related to your kids. Trying to be there, provide help, but also transfer. The goal is to transfer them to being independently able to do them over time. So we use this analogy a lot, and I figured I would start with kind of these visual images that we could keep in our heads about what EF is really all about, because the academic definitions I'll show you, but they're not as helpful, to capture what it is that we're struggling with as parents and what we're seeing. What you believe you're seeing is a struggle for your kids. You're right. They are absolutely struggling with this. This is what they should be developmentally struggling with as adolescents, childhood and adolescence. But there's a difference. The way we conceptualize EF is all these different areas right here: planning, organization, time management skills, task initiation, like getting started to do things. Anyone who's done homework with your kids, gotta get started, and helping them learn self-motivation, helping them think flexibly and deal with transitions, working on their memory. Mostly it's their short-term and working memory, because if you don't get the information in, there's no chance of it being remembered for long-term memory, right? And the self-monitoring skills we're going to talk about. And then controlling impulsive thoughts and actions and speech. Sounds a lot like childhood, right? Emotional control. And related to that, they're almost the same as self-regulation. Like how do they, we're going to get into each of these different areas. So they all are struggling with this, but the difference is that executive functioning is considered a developmental lag in these skills. So has anybody seen online where they have that chart and they say your child's age and what their executive functioning age is? It's a thing that goes around Facebook a lot. And it's helpful to show that what they say is it's a range where you can have a developmental delay in these skills, but it's up to 3 years. So you can have, a 9-year-old that's functioning in these skill areas at 6 years old. It's a big gap to fill. So yes, it's related to childhood. However, there is an excess part that when it goes beyond that, it's now a developmental lag that they have. And so that's when it kind of crosses the line into executive functioning actual deficits. And the reason I'm not saying that it meets criteria for a disorder is because it may surprise people to know that, but it doesn't actually exist as a disorder in our DSM. That's like our Bible that we have to use to diagnose anybody with anything. So we know it exists. We know that there's a huge amount of challenge that so many kids and adults struggle with, but we don't have it as a standalone diagnosis. I don't know if that'll ever change, but we're going to talk about how these are areas that overlap so much with ADHD that it captures the majority of what ADHD kids are struggling with. But then, as you'll see, there are people that don't have ADHD, but they do have executive functioning problems. So there's a gap in our ability to kind of capture that and diagnose it. But in the end, what does the label matter if we know that there's a way to measure it and skills that can be taught, because they're all teachable, then we actually have a game plan and we don't have to worry so much about whether there's a label for it, an accepted definition. So does that make sense? Does that surprise people that there's not an actual diagnosis of it? Okay. Doesn't surprise? Okay. So this is the first thing that people always kind of ask, is this really just code for ADHD? And there's a huge connection between attention and executive function. And this, if we had to draw it, we would say that, it's hard to say an exact percentage, but you would literally see almost all of the same symptoms, and I'll show you in the list as well, where there's shared symptoms between them both. So huge overlap, but the difference is that we do have to have really good assessment of this because we have to know what we're working and dealing with in terms of treatment and management, because not all kids with ADHD have it. All kids with ADHD do have the executive functioning deficits, but then you can have these kids that don't meet criteria for ADHD, but they definitely have executive functioning issues to work on. So good assessment that we'll talk about a little later is going to help us figure out how we can be sure what we're seeing is what we're seeing, whether it's ADHD or not. So not to make this, I was trying to make this fun. So I'm going to have you guess. All right, the first column. Read the first column to yourself. Do you think I'm describing ADHD or executive functioning? And now before we give it away, read the second column and you're going to vote. Which one is ADHD? Oh, I left something in there that made it give it away. Oh, there goes my executive functioning. I just read that just now, too. Oh, when I was doing these slides, I was like, I'll just make it like, you can't tell. There you go. Well, there's my executive functioning for the day. But when you look at those definitions, don't they seem so alike. They're like describing the same kid. So that's what makes it all difficult to tell the difference. And when you see, this is crazy to look at, there's so much, it's in your slides on purpose. But if you look at it and you took away all the text in black, this is the only difference you have left between the two. ADHD has these additional symptoms and really just related to the hyperactivity part. And all of the executive functioning things all are encompassed by ADHD. So the differences disappear if you look at the overlap. Like they're essentially almost the same, except if you have a kid who has, and I should explain, ADHD is not always with the hyperactivity. But so if you have a kid with ADHD without hyperactivity, that's 100%. That looks exactly like executive functioning disorder, and that's it. So there'd be like almost no difference you could tell. So this is what makes it confusing to parents, I think. And when they hear the terms, they're like, I don't know, is one really different than the other? There's also social emotional difficulties. So hopefully I didn't give myself away. Let's try this one more time. Guess which one's ADHD? Okay, for the first column, who thinks that one is ADHD? All right. And you're right. See, I was trying to be slick. I didn't change the order of the columns or anything. I was hoping you would just assume that I switched them, but I didn't switch them. So that's what the differences are. So they're so much in common. The emotional difficulties, the everyday activity difficulties. The same kid, no matter what you call it, is going to have trouble getting out the door in the morning. Right? They are going to be the one that's like, they come downstairs and they have one shoe on still. I only sent you upstairs to put your shoes on. How is it possible you still only have one shoe on? What else did you do up there? It's always going to look the same. So the book bag is going to look the same. The messiness and did you bring your homework home? Do you even know what your homework is? No. The same kinds of answers. So difficulty organizing themselves, difficulty with getting their homework done, rushing through, doing things by not following the instructions, they look the same. So by the way, I should say, literally today, something just changed. The American Academy of Pediatrics, which is not our DSM, but we take guidance from them about treatment recommendations and everything. They are attempting to redefine ADHD. And so as of today, they just released saying that they're changing the criteria, which affects the older kids, so that we're not missing people who are older. Because right now, it looks different, right? As soon as you get to like high school, the problems, the organizational difficulties and all of that, it starts to kind of look a little different, more like the adults that have this problem. And we don't want to miss diagnosing that they have ADHD still. So there's new recommendations for kids that are over 17, or people, not even just kids, but any person over 17. So it's helping us. The good news about all this is it's really helping us tighten up like what we're seeing and classifying it correctly so we don't miss people. And we still don't have, something that says there is an executive functioning disorder, but I don't know if you know this, but there's always like a lobby of people and specialists and experts that are trying to encourage the inclusion of a different or a new disorder or a change of the criteria for the DSM. And the people that are working on ADHD right now are trying to redefine it as an actual executive functioning disorder, like to change the language. So we're on the forefront of all of this, that this is all starting to kind of come together, how we conceptualize this. All right. So this, not that you needed to have like an exact list of how we measure, but I wanted you to know that a lot of work has actually gone into how do you measure this kind of messiness, like we don't have a measure to say, yes, the book bag is messy and they never remember their homework and they're forgetful and, all the different things they have trouble with. We don't really have, we haven't had a great diagnostic screener for that stuff. But what we now finally have is something that captures all the executive functioning challenges, which, if you haven't noticed, right, it's the core deficits of ADHD. So now we have, we're trying to redefine the gold standard of how you assess this. And currently the thinking is that clinical rating scales, along with a good clinical interview, is the way to go. So schools or private providers that you might go to, they may not all equally kind of be up on this area. And so I think about, especially like in this audience, parents are equal members of their PPT team, and there are things that can be brought up on your side of the table about, are there some of the gold standard measures included in the assessment this year? Perfectly valid question. And not that you have to educate and say, what about these? Are you going to include these? But it's good for you to know, yes, these are the ones. If you see it on the list that your child is being tested and these are included, you're in the right place, that everybody's on the right path to really being able to measure this well. It used to get missed a lot. And I think, for example, the one that is called the brief, that one schools have always been pretty good about including. But in and of itself, it's not enough. And like I said, it's in combination with a clinical interview. So whether there's a school psychologist that's doing that as part of the assessment, that's important to know. If they're not doing that, it's usually an outside provider that would do that. That ensures that you don't miss it if you make sure that there's a clinical interview and these rating scales. Not that it has to be every one of them. There's usually about 2 of these used in combination. And that's what's good news. Like, there's actually a way for us to know, because when we think about, our kids that have IEPs, we want there to be measurable goals, and we see where they're starting at and where do they go from there. Are there incremental increases? We want something to measure. And if we didn't do these rating scales, we wouldn't have that kind of data. So it's kind of no longer okay to just say, yeah, they have difficulty organizing themselves. We know Johnny has trouble with this, and talk around the table at a PPT and just talk about it in those terms. Actually quantifying it is possible and necessary. And this is how we can make sure that it doesn't get missed. Because I don't know if I've said it like this before earlier, but these are life skills, right? So all of these skills we're talking about cannot be missed. These are things that are going to set somebody up in life to be able to cope, because it goes into an emotional realm as well, right? So life skills, independent living skills, being able to manage your emotions and plan and organize yourself, that's needed for a successful marriage. That's needed to be a successful employee. That is needed across the board for managing any of yourself in any situation in your life. So we always want to really stop and say, it's not okay to just say, oh, they're struggling with this. This is, your life depends on this for your future, when you think about your child. So I think it's really important to know this is something that that we have a way to measure and how to intervene. Because why would we measure something if we can't then try to intervene and help them? So that's what we do. We look at each of the different areas. We're going to go through each of the areas. I'm going to give you some ideas of what kind of recommendations and interventions can be done. Before we start each one that has some practical suggestions, I want to just globally say, because most people will ask me this, what's the role of medication in this? I'm a psychologist. I did not choose to go into a field where people were getting medicated. Like, I didn't think that would be my main intervention that I did with people. And I still don't think 100%, yes, this is what we always have to do. I always think, can it be done a different way? If someone is assessed and they're in a more mild range, yes, these are teachable skills that they're capable of hearing and implementing. You do know your kids. If you know that they hear information but can't actually act on it because it's too difficult to hold on to it, it takes the memory to hold on to it. It takes your ability to kind of like work on the recommendations. I have plenty of people that I try this out with, right? Like, okay, so we're going to try to do executive functioning coaching. And we don't know because they're on the borderline after you do some assessment. And it's like, okay, well, from week to week, how does the book bag look? How are the grades looking? What's the teacher feedback? Like, we're able to see whether it can be implemented. If it cannot, there is a great benefit for people to have medication to help them. So the medications for ADHD are the ones that they would, if they had just mild executive functioning issues, they can be handled with the teachable skills training, the coaching, things I'll mention like biofeedback. And if not, then there is a role for this. But that would be a kid that really qualifies for a full diagnosis because there's moderate or severe issues and it's really all of what we would call ADHD. Okay? So it's not a clear yes, no. It depends on the kid's assessment. But I think it's just something that always comes up, so I should just put that out there. There's definitely people that will be able to implement these skills. This is why there's a whole business of ADHD coaching, buyer beware, but it's definitely, out there in the coaching realm on purpose because some, in combination even with medication, that's then when they can hear and implement the skills. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So when we think about the different difficulties that they have with these, 10 areas, planning is the first thing. You can't really accomplish anything without planning, right? So when you plan and prioritize to manage the tasks at hand, how you got here today, right? That was a task. That was something that you had to prioritize different things and you made it happen, that you fit in coming here, right? There's lots of different ways to work on this with kids. There's external systems. We are the external executive functioning for them, right? And we help give them these tools and side by side implement them with them. So external systems like visual reminders, visual calendars, I'm such a geek that I love like stationery stores and like Staples and back to school supply shopping and stuff. I think that is something you can get kids excited about sometimes. Like, okay, we get to go pick out and you get to pick what homework planner you're going to use and, what your supplies are going to be and try to get them excited about that, like part of the process. That can be fun to kind of have like scavenger hunt, when they're younger too, looking through the store for the perfect color Post-it notes and, letting them customize stuff that they're going to use all year. So other things like having a homework center, at home. I'm going to show you pictures of how this could look. So this, for example, see how clean that desk is at the top right? That kind of like clear slate. And believe it or not, that trifold, is it called trifold? Yeah. On the left is actually something that they will use at school. And so they do not think it's odd. They've seen it before. If you had that for a kid who had a lot of distraction and difficulty focusing, that's like a $2 item from Staples, right? And you have it at their homework desk and it blocks out, it's like putting blinders on. It doesn't allow you to see even the mess. I've had kids' desks that are so messy that they literally just plop that there so they can't see the rest of the mess. And so it's at least a start to drown out the distractions. So things like having a homework center like that and setting up routines with them is key. We have a routine for everything we do as adults. And if you think about it, executive functioning is, those skills are adulting. It's learning adulting. And so if they can get into learning routines for themselves, it is not punitive. It's not feeling, I don't think that we should feel like we're disciplining them. Like, we are helping them by setting up routines, because they'll do that for the rest of their lives. And so setting up a routine where they check their homework bag and their folder each night, when they come home from school, and having places like this. So this is just to represent a planner. And as kids get a little older, I really like using apps. It's the one thing that we can engage with kids about, because they like technology. So if we can say, okay, let's find a good app that would actually help with time management. So to organize yourself and know to plan for projects coming up. There's a good one called My Homework, but there's so many. If you go to the App Store, what's the equivalent of that in Android? I always forget. Something store, Play Store? Yeah, that's it. And you just, type in homework, and you'll get all these homework organization apps. And I do that with the kids that are in college. And you can start that all the way back when they're in middle school. And they'll like it. They usually like technology. So they might not want the paper and pencil routine like we did, but giving them the app idea is a way to engage them in getting organized. And related to planning is organization, right? So this is that they have to figure out the order in which things should be done, and then kind of store the information so they can use it later. And this is something I have worked with them on, depending on age, just making sure that they have the supplies that would help them be able to organize things, color coding it for them, helping them organize a backpack routine so that there's, some kind of order to it, what they bring home each day. So one of the things is, supplies, doing book bag organization. For organization, I think it's related to planning, and so the same apps are going to be helpful with organizing what needs to be done for each class. And so you end up with apps. That's what checklists represents. Now, these all flow together. You plan, organize, and then manage your time. So those same exact apps then are building on the next part of the skill they need, which is to manage their time. So they have difficulty figuring out how much time it takes to do a project. This is going to sound so strange, but I literally have people time themselves doing routines all the time. How long does it take to get out the door in the morning? That's a key one, because they have no idea how long it takes them to get cleaned up, put their clothes on, get their book bag, and get out the door. And so if you can, they have a special insufficiency in noticing the passage of time. They tend to be like in a time vacuum, right? They don't know how long it's going to take to get somewhere or anything. So if you can help make them more aware of how long routines take, that would be great. I had a kid this week who said to me, because he actually did his homework in the session with me, and he was like, I wasn't even timing him. It's funny, but he said that only took 10 minutes, and I was like, yes, that's right. Like, being aware of the passage of time is a great emerging skill that they really have to start to be keyed into. So the way to work on this is to make them more aware of time. It doesn't matter how young they are, unless it would be like a toy because they're too young. But as soon as they're old enough, get them wearing a watch. Have them be aware of the passage of time that way. Putting clocks in their path everywhere they go. The bathroom, right? They get stuck in the bathroom and it's half an hour later. And it's like, okay, did you realize you were in there for a half an hour just singing to yourself in that mirror, or playing with your hair? Like, did you realize that was 30 minutes? So talking about the time, putting it in their path, that there's there's so many cute kid clocks too. Have a clock in the bathroom, have a clock in their bedroom, have a clock where they're in the central part of their house, like where they sit and do homework too. let them be aware of how long things take. It's always less time than they expect when they're thinking that they have to do their homework and it's going to take forever. And they always underestimate when you ask them, well, how long will it take to get ready and get out to school today and get to the car? They'll think they'll be there. I'll be there in 5 minutes. They don't realize every part of their routine. So they estimate wrong in both directions, and it's really just a skill that needs to kind of start being worked on. So having clocks and watches around. And then with their extra special sense of not knowing what time it is, they get sucked into things for too long, right? So they're on the internet or playing a game, and they don't realize they didn't come up for air in 10 hours, right? They have no idea that much time has passed. So I'm a very big proponent of really, really early on setting up limits and website blockers. So it doesn't matter if you haven't already implemented it. Hey, blame me. Just be like, oh, I went to this thing and they were talking about this and I didn't know this website blocker existed. We're doing this now. They won't know. Just blame me. But if you use website blockers, I'm going to show you. One of them is called Cold Turkey. I love that name. But for school-age kids, it catches a very wide range of ages if you use something like Circle by Disney, because it's great that you can limit the cell phone, their Kindle, all different electronic devices, and their laptop. I think it even picks up if you have a smart TV. Like, it picks up every single Wi-Fi device in the whole house. And at my last practice, we did an excessive gaming group. So those were the ones who were online all the time, and they were playing video games way too much. So we started doing a routine recommendation for Circle. And I forget how many, it's maybe $8 a month or something after you've bought the device. But it's really helpful with limiting specific websites and then the timing of when they're allowed to be on the devices. So you can have the internet pull out of those devices and just goes dark at midnight. So, you get to set those limits. So those are things that if you use technology to your advantage, you don't have time lost on your side too. Every night, the same arguments. Oh, it's 8 o'clock. Oh, it's 9 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock. You need to go to bed. You need to put the phone down. And depending on the age, honestly, there's, especially with YouTube, of all ages, there's inappropriate content when they're young that you have to worry about. And then when they're older, it's getting sucked into it for hours that you have to worry about. So being able to block certain websites is very helpful. So I like also that it's a respectful family media agreement that is done as part of the Circle. So you're getting agreement. It's not, I'm pulling the plug at midnight. You're done. It's this is what it gives you, the guidance in a document that this is how you could launch it with the family. And so everybody is on the same page, not loving the idea, believe me, but this is an agreement that you have going forward. So there's parent support for it, is what I'm saying. So these are watches, clocks, Circle, and there's website blockers like Cold Turkey. And that's like, if you have, I'm also a very big proponent of having a central computer, like not have the laptop up in your bedroom, but it's going to be in the living room where you're in the center of the house. Much less likely to get into trouble with the computer if it's public domain in the middle of the house. And on that laptop, you block those websites by using something like Cold Turkey. This way there's no, this is what happens when you have ADD. You have, everything pulls your attention. So you go down the rabbit hole and you're in there for hours. And so helping them with the restraint, because that's what our job as the coaches are, is to, help pull them out of that so they don't go down the rabbit hole. Because I have to tell you, the life of somebody who has trouble with these things is really demoralizing. They don't feel good about the fact that they have messed up at school, not pleased their teachers or parents, or not been able to manage their time, so they end up not being able to sleep that night, and they're stuck on YouTube till 3 or 4 in the morning. They're not happy with themselves after. So part of us thinking about putting those limits in is really for their self-preservation, so they feel good about themselves. And so I just always put a little PSA about that, because I know the parent guilt that comes with thinking of putting in limits is really significant. So task initiation is about how do you get started with things. This is always about homework, right? So for this, what I'm going to say about it is think about recommending timers. So, like an exercise, there's interval training, like short bursts of exercise. You don't have to do a full 30 minutes every day. But if you're doing like short little bursts of good, intense exercise, that's good. Teaching them that you can use that as a homework strategy can help. Like beat the clock, how much can you get done in 5 minutes? And you set the timer. Helping them like up the challenge level and interest level. By helping them with, seeing that, okay, I only have to do 5 minutes. And then they're able to keep going. Like they honestly don't usually stop at 5 minutes and say, okay, I'm done. Phew, I don't have to do any more homework. It's usually like they just ripped the Band-Aid off and they were able to keep going. And it was just hard to get started. So good assessment, again, is going to tell you which kids have problems with which areas. So some kids are just really hard to get started, and then you know what interventions to give. And then other things that kind of like energize them and kind of give them energy and give them some like interest level is to let them listen to music, let them do like a short burst of exercise, like jumping jacks before, and then having something meaningful as a reward. And I want to say, like, we all do things for rewards. We wouldn't probably all go to work if we didn't get paid. There's always a reward in the world. And so on a kid level, there's a meaningful reward for them too. It just has to have their input though. When the kids are little, they use the one in the middle. That's a visual timer. So they can see like how much time is going by, because they don't really know how to tell time yet. And then when they're older, they can use an iPhone or a stopwatch to make it seem kind of cool that they're doing it. And then related to this, I would say is almost the same, is how do you motivate yourself to do things? And the only thing I'll say about this is always consider what is motivating and what is considered a reward to the kid. Let them be the one that generates the ideas. And you give them a range, like, I'm not going to buy you a Range Rover because you did your SAT prep, like it is going to be in proportion to what they are accomplishing, and meaningful rewards. And I'll tell you, you'd be very surprised what people pick. Like, it's so touching sometimes when kids are like, I just wanted to play a board game with mom or dad. That was their reward that they picked. Like, parents never would have thought they wanted to spend time with them. It's shocking usually. So you never know. Mental flexibility is the skill that is all about, it's hard to stop what we're thinking and also how to move from one situation to another. So we have to think flexibly and be flexible in our life. There's lots of different ways to work on this. When kids are young, you know how you used to have to say like, okay, in 5 minutes, we're leaving the store. In 5 minutes, we're going to bed now. Giving warnings about upcoming transitions always help, no matter how old, really. And mental flexibility is a really kind of interesting one. Now that we have social emotional learning in school, there's great curriculum for this, and it's accessible to parents. And so in the resources, I put a website that this is the one I'm talking about. It's called socialthinking.com. They have the coolest stuff. So when kids are young, we hopefully, get a chance to start modeling for them things that have characters. So Superflex is a character that goes along a whole series of books. And there's like posters and stuff that the schools will, these are called unthinkable characters. They're not like bad guys, but these unthinkable characters. Can you see what it says? I'm trying to like give you an idea of what one of them is called. Cool cucumber. Like that's someone who stays calm in all the different situations in the story, right? So they all have different characters. This is the focus one. So his superpower is he can focus. So you're teaching about how to focus and concentrate. The brain eater is the thing that makes you get distracted. So it helps you learn about that. And then when kids are older, I just wanted to say one of the things that could help is always role modeling. You know, I think that it was hard for me to choose to do that, and I'm going to tell you about it. You know, it's okay for us to share that. And certain games that have different rules that keep changing, so they can't get stuck always applying the same solutions to things over and over, is a card game called Phase 10. Has anybody played that? I love it. It's cool. As an adult. So like adults will play with kids even, and you know, it doesn't feel like a little kid thing at all. It's something all adults play. Like every Thanksgiving and Christmas, my family plays this. So like adults like it. But it does have there's 10 different rounds of it. And so every round, there's a different way to win. And so you have to keep moving with the times and keeping track of things, which leads me to, how do you keep things in your working memory? So this is difficulty with holding on to information so that they can complete a task. So they have to learn how to take notes in class. They can do things like use technology, take pictures of their homework that's displayed, so that they don't have to hold everything in their memory. So imagine if you got hurt and you sprained your ankle and you'd have to use like crutches for a little while. There's certain things that we always do to accommodate ourselves when something is a little like a weaker skill, a weaker area of our body even. And when we teach them to just, okay, it's hard for you to hold on to all of this, don't stress yourself out, because that's a whole other problem. Let's offload some of these things. We call it cognitive offloading. Let's offload some of this stuff so you can be just using technology when it could collect the information for you without the strain on your brain. So there's some note-taking apps like Evernote. My homework app got 2 plugs because it's really helpful. And back in the day when we had flashcards, there's now a digital version of that. And so the flashcard app is helpful. And then I also spend time teaching people about the memory palace technique. Did you ever learn that when you were growing up? Well, it's a visual way, which is how most of us learn and remember things. It teaches them how to use a map of like a familiar shopping center, mall, or maybe even the houses, the rooms in your house, to store visually different information. So if you Google memory palace technique, it walks you through how to do that with your kids, and they can study for bio that way. They can study their Spanish words that way for vocab. Like it translates to everything except math. I feel like we are strugglers with math. Like it's not so helpful, except the PhotoMath app, which is awesome, that kids love to use. So those are some ways that we can kind of bridge the gap for them when they need to offload the information. And then the last 3 skills are all very related. You have to be able to monitor yourself and manage what's expected of you. And then emotional control is being able to rein in your emotions, identify and rein in your emotions. And emotional regulation or self-regulation is, how do you cope? Like, what are the specific kind of coping skills you use? So for self-monitoring of all of these, I honestly think it's very helpful for many kids of most ages, above 8, to use the Revibe watch, because it helps them with noticing they're off track. It has a gentle vibration in their watch. It looks very much like a Fitbit. And Oh, there it is. And what you do is you have certain settings that, the box just walks you through. And I have a high school student that's using it right now even. So it's not considered just uncool and for little kids. It's, even a high schooler is using it. So it vibrates to teach you to say to yourself, am I on task right now? And then you're able to catch yourself. You're daydreaming. You're talking to a friend. You are not paying attention to the teacher. It's excellent to have on your wrist when you go to school. So it helps them kind of get feedback about whether they're going off track. And there's a stay on task app that's different because it doesn't vibrate or anything, but helps them with alerts. So an older kid, that could be helpful. And then these last two are all about, how do you inhibit and rein in your emotions? So I'm going to say, depending on the age, when they're younger, you want to help them learn how to inhibit themselves by playing things like Simon Says, you can't go unless you're allowed to go, practicing stopping on command, freeze tag, stuff like that. And then with emotional control, there are, in the socialthinking.com website, there's a great thing called the zones of regulation. I want to see if I have a picture. Oh, this is it. This is the zones of regulation. It teaches kids how to talk, very much like the movie Inside Out, about using a color to represent how they're feeling. So they're able to say, this is, I'm in the red zone, rather than have to sit and say when they're really upset, I was upset because of this and that happened. Nobody can talk when they're that upset, right? But being able to just say with a parent, what color zone are you in? Red. That's all they have to say. And then they're able to figure out, oh, how do I move myself into the green zone again, where I'm happy and I'm ready to learn and I'm back on track. And so the curriculum a lot of schools are using now, the school psychologists, if your kid has lunch bunch groups, they are pretty much probably using the same curriculum. And it's available on that website as well, so that parents have the same language. So for emotional control, you might be doing things like the Zones of Regulation app, for example. You could be doing from home, and that reinforces what they're also learning about that language at school. And like I said before, there might be a role for therapy and medication as well. And mindfulness and biofeedback are these last two kind of self-regulation tools to talk about. We know what mindfulness is, but we don't always know how to implement it. So this is a guide, and these are some good, well-vetted and based on age groups, apps for you to look at. So the Sesame Street one is good from 2 to 5 is what they say, but I've seen up to 8-year-olds still like it. That helps them walk through how to see the, this monster character gets upset and angry about stuff and how he copes with it. And it walks them through the whole process. Kids, when they're having trouble, they often have trouble sleeping. And so this Dreamy Kid app is very helpful for soothing and calming for nighttime. And then these are additional ones that you can look through. I purposely did this. I stocked it with information so that you could refer to it based on what your kids' ages are and just look at the one that's relevant to you. So that's what these books are. Because I feel like if you go to the internet, it'll be like the wild, wild west, and you won't be able to figure out what end is up, right? It gets so confusing. So these are well-vetted, good books based on ages. You can see the title of the book, if it's for teens or for younger kids. And like I said, self-regulation is something that, maybe kids will benefit from working on this with a coach, or maybe going to therapy, or maybe doing something like biofeedback with a therapist. Biofeedback is just a way to be aware of the stress that they're feeling and become aware of it using mindfulness. But in a physiological way, they're able to actually see that on a device, a iPad or their cell phone, that they are getting stressed because it's measuring their pulse. So every phone has a camera in it, and because of that, it has an infrared light. And so when you put your finger on the camera through this app, you're able to get your pulse, and it gives you a reading of what your stress levels are. It's fascinating. Most of them all were free before, and they're not anymore, but they're very affordable. And I use it so that the equipment that I use in the office, they can continue to practice when they're home every day, and be able to, people even do it with their parents, because everybody benefits from that, right? So this is also, if you wanted to know how to do kind of calm down breathing that helps the biofeedback apps work the best. There's different strategies for breathing, and I wanted you to have that for the future. And then these are some well-vetted apps. Stress Guide, the K, I don't know why it says K, but that one used to be free, and it's not anymore. I think it's like $59 for the whole year. And I used it the entire time it was free, so I'm totally hooked on it because it's been 2 years. So it's a really good one. And the one I use in the office is this one, so I've known about it for like 8 years when I first started doing this. And there's a computer desktop version plus having the iPhone version. So that's one that you can, it's called Inner Balance, and you can search in the App Store for. And then these are just to let you know the names of some programs that are for kids. And I put the age group so you'd know what's appropriate for your kids. This is just to show you what, at the end of training, someone can accomplish with biofeedback is that they can go from having this really, like, you could probably tell without having any kind of like ability to like know what that is, that looks stressful, right? Like that, the lines that go up and down on the screen like that, that's somebody's breathing pattern. That is somebody who's holding their breath, they're stressed out, they're tense, their stress score is really high in the beginning, and then by the end, it smooths out completely, that up and down nice wave. When people learn how to harness their breathing and use biofeedback, they're able to see their stress scores decrease just by looking at the app and using the breathing techniques. So a lot of people are guided by doing it with a therapist first, but it's in the public domain. It's something that's, you know, freely accessible through app stores, and it's possible for people to use it at home. And even as a family, for that kind of connection and making sure that, you know, you're modeling, you know, that this is something that's important, and maybe, you know, you want to learn it too. How to use harness breathing so that you can reduce your stress levels. And so just generally, all of what we talked about today is just that what you can do to be helpful kind of executive functioning coaches for your kids is to help them with providing daily routine and rituals for their daily life, help them practice self-regulation, always modeling different behaviors that you want them to follow. You can help teach them time management skills. And you can always be giving them warnings of upcoming changes. Their life is always changing, you know, as they're growing and maturing. Help them, you know what comes next. And then helping them talk through difficult tasks. These are all things that when we envision that you're going to be the person as their scaffolding, you realize that you can be imparting these things. When needed, and you know, when you get to that point, when needed, therapists can step in and help do these things. And it's always a possibility for you to, you know, explore something like that. But I think there's a lot that can be done at the parent level to be able to like look at what would be helpful, try it, and if there is something more that needs to be done, then enlist professionals to help. All right. So that is the end of my talk. I wanted to make sure that we had I apologize, I wanted to make sure we had more time for questions, but we definitely have time. And this is how to contact me. And if anybody didn't get that PowerPoint, you can absolutely grab it from the table when you leave. But I wanted you to be able to have it especially for future references, okay? Because I know it was chock full of stuff.